Hi, I'm Susanna Bowling, and this is live from the Hotel Edison. Times Square Chronicles presents. Jeffrey, your book, Something Wonderful Right Away, came out in 1978, but it's having a resurgence and being redone. Can you tell us about that book, why you wrote it, and what's come out of it?
Okay, well, why I wrote it, I was a kid growing up in a town called Evanston, Illinois, which is right next to Chicago. And everything that was cool in Chicago at that point was Second City. We hadn't yet started the Chicago theater renaissance that made Chicago famous around the world. But Second City was going, and it was a place where a lot of incredible actors and stars and writers and directors came from, starting with people like in the early days, Mike Nichols and Elaine May, Barbara Harris, Alan Arkin, Alan Alda, Joan Rivers, Robert Klein, David Steinberg, Paul Mazursky, John Belushi, Jim Belushi, John Candy, Gilda Radner, Steve Carell. I mean, you go on and on, Tina Fey. It's an extraordinary incubator of talent. And I was interested in why did this place, which was started in a hole in the wall on an investment of $10,000, why did this place become the comedy giant, this thing which reshaped American entertainment and American culture? And so I started interviewing these people. Most of them were still around back in the days I was interviewing. We've lost a lot of them. But I started interviewing these people, and it turned out if you know how to invent scenes with friends on your feet, you are internalizing the rules of how to write scenes and direct scenes. It takes you back to the original function of the actor, which is to create material spontaneously. You know, people, before there was writing, there was theater, but they didn't have any scripts to look at, so obviously they were making stuff up. So anyway, it was an excuse for me to meet all these people, and then that ended up jump-starting my career as a playwright, so I ended up indeed working with some of these people on my plays. But the thing that was sort of funny about the book when it came out, I'll tell you where Something Wonderful right away, the title came from. There was a wonderful actor named Paul Sand. He's still with us. And Paul at one point was doing a play on Broadway with Paul Sills, who created Second City, a thing called Story Theater. Yeah. Linda Lavin came into that, a lot of other people, Valerie Harper, Avery Schreiber. But Paul Sand was working on one of the scenes in Story Theater. They were developing it improvisationally, and he was having trouble. And Paul Sills says, you know, Sand, you've been an actor 5,000 years, and you're going to struggle, and you're going to have it, but eventually you're going to get it, and you're going to be great. So why don't you just cut the shit and do it now? And I said, that was his note? He says, yeah, he just wanted something wonderful. And Paul said, he wanted something wonderful right away. And I said, oh, there's the title, Something Wonderful Right Away. So all these people came out of that place, and I thought I was writing a book that had nothing to do with playwriting because they developed their material improvisationally. Turned out it had everything to do with playwriting. All the theories of how you improvise, which were invented by a remarkable woman named Viola Spolin, who was Paul Sills' mother. Theater games were invented by Viola Spolin during the Depression, running a children's theater in Chicago. All those games and all those techniques have direct application to writing plays and movies and TV shows. And I came out of writing that book, out of interviewing all those people, being a much better playwright, although I had no idea that was going to be the byproduct. The funny thing that happened was that as people read the book, they said, oh, I want to do this work. And it turned out that people read the book and started theaters. So a place called I.O. in Chicago got started, and out of I.O. came the Upright Citizens Brigade. Another place called the Annoyance Theater came out of there, and out of that...
And they've moved to New York.
Oh, the Annoyance has a presence in New York, and Upright Citizens Brigade, of course, has a presence in New York, and in fact, Second City has just reopened in New York at Williamsburg. I'm going there tomorrow night. So I had not anticipated that the book would be anything than an excuse for me to meet cool people. And it turns out that people started theaters because they read the book and they said, oh, I want to do this kind of work. And it's affected the way people build plays sometimes, too. Every summer, I get together with a group of improvisers who are also writers, and we improvise based on each other's premises, and then we go off and write plays based on the improvs. So for instance, Dan Castellaneta, who's Homer Simpson, came to 2 or 3 of these things, and he and his wife, Deb LaCusta, who's also from Second City, they're writing plays this way. And at a certain point, they said, why are we waiting a year to fly 3,000 miles to come and work with you? We can do this in our home. So they run a thing like what we started years ago. They run it out of their home in Los Angeles. But a lot of people are developing material improvisationally. I'm not claiming that we invented it. What's interesting is if you have actors playing characters, they start with their own individual voices, so the voices are more distinct than if you just start with one writer. I didn't mean to bang that, but if you just start with one writer throwing their voice into a bunch of different characters. But if you have, as I say, you start off with the characters being differentiated by being played by different actors, you're going to get very distinct voices, and it's going to help the playwriting. So anyway, that's part of why I did it, and I discovered that all these people have read the book, and I met Colbert briefly at the 50th anniversary of Second City, and he started quoting the book to me, and I thought, okay, he's got a perfect memory. That's interesting to hear the words coming back. But it had an influence which I did not anticipate. It's a little bit like, you remember when we were kids and there was a book by Harold Clurman called The Fervent Years that everybody read? And everybody decided, oh, we're going to do repertory theater, and that was the beginning of the American Conservatory Theater and Circle Rep and a lot of other places. So this book ended up having a similar effect to the Fervent Years. I'm not going to claim that it's as good a book as The Fervent Years, which is a masterpiece, but it's still a pretty useful book.
Of all the people that you've interviewed, who taught you the most?
Oh, that's easy. That was Mike Nichols. We had a terrific conversation, and something happened in our conversation, and he stayed a friend literally till 3 weeks before he died. The last time I saw him, he was climbing up a flight of stairs to see one of my plays in a loft in Greenwich Village. He was the most articulate and one of the most constructive people I've ever met. Never at a loss for an analogy. He read everything, he'd seen everything, he was eager to be helpful. He just was insanely generous. At one point, he said, so what's new? I said, oh, I've got an anthology of my plays that's coming out, because Northwestern University was printing this anthology of my plays. He said, would a quote from me on the cover be useful? I said, I kind of think so. There were no errors. He was fun to be with. And if you made him laugh, it just made your day. I mean, I remember at one point, we were talking about something. He says, when did people get so greedy? People are just, have you noticed, Jeff? They're just so greedy. And I said, well, Mike, haven't you heard? Greed is the new black. This was before that TV show came out. And he just fell on the floor. I thought, I've made Mike Nichols convulse. I mean, it's not the greatest joke in the world, but it surprised him. Do you remember in in the Henry Fours, they talk about Falstaff, who's not only witty in himself, he's cause of wit in others. Oh, yeah. He was like that. He tended to bring the best of people, the best out of people, which is why he was a great teacher and a great director. So that's an easy question to answer. But most of the people I talked to, I learned something from. I remember talking to Barbara Harris, and she recommended I read a book, and I read that book, and it transformed my ideas about. I learned an enormous amount that ended up being. It was a book of social science that had nothing to do with the theater, but it was about human behavior, and I could instantly apply all those theories to playwriting. So these people. They're not, a lot of them are gone now, but they were walking treasure troves. They had read everything, they were generous, they were funny. It's interesting because I think that there are two great traditions in American acting. One we all know as being like the method, Stanislavski, and then a bunch of Americans picked up Stanislavski and adapted it and called it the method, or didn't call it the method and fought with Lee Strasberg like Stella Adler. They would cuss at each other across theater lobbies and stuff. But that sort of psychological basis, and acting is being drawn out of yourself and out of your own experience. But if you take a look at the people who came out of the method, they are figures that you think of them as being alienated and rebellious. Brando, Dean, Kim Stanley, Paul Newman, all these people, you view them in isolation. You don't think of them in a group. Second City, they're gangs. They're people who get together and they say, we're who's here? Oh, we're all here? Let's play. It's collaboration. It's a group. So you don't think of them as isolated people. You think of them collaborating on what is the event? Okay, let's build it together. So I see them as flip sides of the same coin. Actor studio, Stanislavski, emphasis on isolation and alienation and interiority, and Second City is more exterior. Let's play together and find something out of the play. And I think those are the two. That's my theory. It's great when you run into people who are trained in both. And part of what was interesting about this, you remember the film Analyze This?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that was Harold Ramis from Second City directing, and there you have, Robert De Niro, who's one of the big icons of the Actors Studio and Stanislavski thing, and that was sort of the marriage between the two traditions. It was partially De Niro and his gang making fun of themselves, using Second City language and techniques. So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination. A lot. I mean, Barbara Harris was a member of the studio as well as being Second City. Mike Nichols was a member of the studio. Yeah, she was one of the most brilliant players we had, and people wrote for her. Every once in a while, at the last minute when she was in town, she would crash on our sofa, which was, my wife and I would. We've got Barbara Harris crashing on our sofa. How did that happen? Okay. Anyway, but she had read everything and was insanely smart and insanely insecure, but wonderful company.
Now, you had another actor who fell in love with one of your plays.
Oh, that was interesting.
The Value of Names, which is coming to London, correct?
I'm going to direct it in London. It'll be open in February. It's a play I wrote years ago. It's about the aftermath of the blacklist. I'll tell you how it got started. I have a friend whose father was blacklisted, a performer who was blacklisted, and in fact the family had to move to Europe because he could no longer get work in the States. So my friend was cast in a Broadway show, her first Broadway show. And I congratulated her, and I said, gee, what would your dad say if the director of your show was somebody who had named names or somebody who had named his name? And she said, well, our director is Tommy Tune, and he didn't. So I said, oh, okay. Also, he was probably 6 years old when the blacklist was going on. But anyway.
Nor would Tommy have ever cared to do that.
Anyway, but I thought, she said, my dad's kind of waspy and phlegmatic, and he'd probably just suffer in silence. And I said, if your dad were a Jewish dad, he would not suffer in silence. So I started writing a play about a young woman who is staying with her father in Los Angeles. She's doing an out-of-town tryout of a play. She doesn't know him terribly well because her parents were divorced, but now that she's an adult, she's trying to get to know him while she's staying with him, and she's rehearsing this play. And in the middle of the rehearsals of the play, the director takes sick, and they bring in a new director, and the new director is the guy who named her father to the committee. And so she's in this situation of, is she going to work with this guy or not? And the director, understanding who she is without being invited, comes up to the house ostensibly to get her to stay with the show, but really to try to repair the relationship with the father. And it turns out this is not unlike what happened in the out-of-town tryout of Anything Happened on the Way to the Forum. They were out of town. They were in Washington. The show was in terrible trouble. They needed a show doctor. And the show doctor that they wanted was Jerome Robbins, but Jerome Robbins had testified to the House Un-American Activities Committee and had named names. Zero Mistel had been blacklisted. He was the star. They said to Mistel, we think that Jerry Robbins can save the show. Would you have an objection? And Mistel said, we on the left do not blacklist. Bring the shithead in. But his co-star in that was Jack Guilford. Jack Guilford's wife, Madeline, for a short time when Robbins was sort of experimenting with heterosexuality, Madeline had gone with Robbins and had taken him around to the dance halls where he learned all the moves that were in Fancy Free and On the Town. And then when he named names, he named Madeline's name. This is a story I got from Madeline. So Jack comes home and says to Madeline, I think I have to drop out of the show. She says, why? He says, they're bringing Jerry Robbins in. How can I work with him after what he did to you, the damage that he did? And Madeline said, Jack, this is the best part you've had in years. It could make you a star again. And Jack said, yeah, but you have to have standards. You have to stand for something. And Madeline said, that's right, Jack. You go ahead and blacklist yourself. And so she stayed with the show. He stayed with the show. But she told me the story. I said, that's a great line.
And that's
can I have that line?
Is
she
it
says,
in the play?
Yeah, she says, go darling, take. So it's in the play. Robbins saved the show. He came in and he took a show which was a flop in Washington and made it a hit on Broadway, and it restored Mestel's career and Jack Guilford's career, and then later Robbins and Mestel, who still hated each other's guts, did a little thing called Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
So, these guys didn't like each other at all, but they knew that they got great work out of each other. I've occasionally worked with disagreeable people, and you don't get better work out of them.
This is a play I actually really have to see because I'm a firm believer that McCarthyism is happening now.
Oh, it is. That's one of the reasons why they wanted to do the play again. It's why Jack kept on doing the play. Jack did that play in 6 theaters. There's a point in the play where he and his daughter are having an argument. There's a part in the play where she's supposed to do a topless scene, and he doesn't like this very much. And she says, "Oh, grow up, Dad." She says, "The theater has changed since you were a kid. Wake up, Clifford Odets is dead and gone." And he responds, he says, "Clifford Odets, he was dead and gone before he was dead." The actress who was playing it said, "I don't understand that line." I said, "Well, Clifford Odets, this brave lefty playwright, went and became a friendly witness to the House Un-American Activities Committee and named names." Yeah. And a lot of people thought that he never wrote anything good after that, and that he had committed spiritual suicide by naming names. And then Jack said, "Yeah, I remember talking to him the day after he did that." And we went, "What?" And it turned out that Jack was in a production of a revival of Golden Boy that Odets was directing, and some of the names that he named were members of the cast of the play that he was directing. Oh, it's insane. There was an actress who didn't know the history. I knew the history from doing the research, and Jack knew the history because he was there. And that's why he wanted to do the play, because he was witness to it, and he thought that this was the play that told the story the best. So he just kept doing the play whenever. Sometimes people would call him up and say, "Come to thus and such regional theater, we want you to do a play." He said, "Well, I'll come to your regional theater if you do The Value of Names." So they would do my play instead of the one that they were planning because they wanted him. And then it worked out because the play got good reviews and Jack was brilliant.
I seriously hope that it goes from London to New York.
Well, it'd be nice to have that happen again. You have to understand, this is an old play. The play premiered in 82,
lesson we have
83.
not learned.
No, we're never going to learn the lesson.
But we need to learn this lesson. It's
We're never going to
important.
learn that lesson. We're in the middle of a politics now which prove that we weren't learning the lesson.
I know, and that's why I'm saying this.
Mr. Trump is a protege of Roy Cohn, and Roy Cohn was one of the people who sat behind the desk at the committee. Right. So, if we'd learned the lesson, we wouldn't be facing the choice that we're facing in this election. Some corners of America are never going to learn the lesson. And I'm sure that's just what people want to hear, is this, sympathetic lefty playwright lecturing middle America about this. But also something that the left has to learn is that there are people who are living between the coasts. Right. And they have their own experiences and their own values. I wrote a play called Flyovers that came out in '98. And when I look at Flyovers now, I realize I was writing about the people who were so mad that they would vote for somebody like Trump as an expression of their rage. He wasn't on the political scene at the time, but I realized subsequently that I was writing about the conditions that would make current politics happen. Neither side knows their history. When I was a kid, in the 60s, and I was in my teens, the protesters in the 60s didn't want to talk to the people who had pioneered this stuff in the 30s and the 40s, So, they're old, what do they know? Well, I've written a few plays in which I've tried to fill in some gaps. I wrote a play about William Kunstler called Kunstler, which played...
Oh, I saw that.
Oh, I wrote that.
I saw that.
Jeff McCarthy.
Yeah, it was great.
I wrote that for him. Yeah, we did that with Jeff McCarthy in London in May. Started here.
Oh, I saw it here.
Yeah, we did it 59 East 59th Street, and then it played Barrington Stage.
Yes.
And it played a lot of places. But then we decided to take it to London. We had no idea whether it would mean anything to anybody over there. We got these extraordinary reviews in London. And it's because Kunstler went over well in London that the theater there said, "Do you have something else?" And I said, "Yeah, The Value of Names." They said, "Okay, we'll do it." I said, "I'd like to direct it." And they said, "Okay, you don't look insane. You can direct it." So
who's playing the roles? Do you know yet?
Well, you may know the name Jeremy Carrican as a playwright because he co-wrote Lifespan of a Fact. Well, Jeremy, in addition to being a talented playwright, is a talented actor, and he's living a lot of the time in London. So I thought rather than find a British actor who was going to pretend to have the accent. Huh?
Simon Russell Beale.
Simon, he's not. He will not play a pub theater. But Jeremy Carrican and a marvelous British actor named Tim Hardy. The two of them are doing it, and then there's an American actress who's called Catherine Lyle, who was studying over in London and who's got a work permit there, and she came in, and we instantly said, well, she's perfect for the daughter. So I've got this great cast, and 2/3 of my job is done because I've cast it right. So anyway, I'm going to sit there with my wonderful collaborators, and we're going to find the play.
So if it moves to New York, who would you want to cast in the role?
Oh, I've seen so many interesting people play that part. Ed Asner has played it. Judd Hirsch has played it. Shelley Berman has played it. Hector Elizondo has played it. I have a dream that someday I'll see Danny DeVito play it. But I have.
Have you shown this play to Danny and his daughter?
I don't know him. I don't know them.
Oh, I think I can do something for you.
Not everybody in the theater knows each other. I've interviewed a lot of people.
I always think they do.
I've interviewed a lot of people. They just happen not to be people that I've interviewed or know.
No, give me the script. I can.
All right, I'll send it to you.
You've also got another play opening at New Jersey Rep. Can you talk about that?
Okay, this is kind of an odd situation. I teach a playwriting workshop on Zoom on Sunday nights. We started in the middle of the pandemic, and the group has just continued. And I had a lovely guy in the group named Michael Kosarowicz, who was had just retired from a career in IT, and he was exploring some characters, and he died. And I thought that two of the characters that he'd come up with, I don't know if he knew these people or not, but it was this small-town prostitute and her 18-year-old daughter were living in a trailer park. And the relationship was awfully interesting. And I asked Michael's widow, can I write a play based on these characters? And she says, yeah, okay. So I started writing a play, and I was thinking about this woman living in a trailer park who's got a small-town clientele who's probably got regulars. And one Wednesday night, her Wednesday night regular doesn't show up, and the next Wednesday night he still doesn't show up, and she's worried about him. So she calls him up. She says, what's going on? Are you mad at me or something? He says, come on over. What? She says, to your house? She says, yeah, come on over. He gives her the address. He lives in a McMansion. She's, of course, never visited him there. And he's in a wheelchair. He says, this is why. This is why I haven't seen you. She says, they tell me if I'm a good boy, I may be out of the chair in 6 months. She says, well, how are you doing? He says, I'm bored out of my skull. He says, I've got enough money for health care and all that stuff, but the people I'm hiring, if they can speak English, they can't talk about anything that I'm interested in. And he says, apart from everything else, you and I always had a pretty good time. And he goes, hey, why don't you be my health care worker? She says, what are you, nuts? I don't have the certification. He says, 90% of the people looking out for people don't have certification. They're looking out for their relatives, and they push the pills, and they help people in and out of bathtubs. And, after our history, I don't think you'd have any problem helping me in and out of a bathtub. and she says, really? She says, I've got an 18-year-old daughter. He says, I've got a McMansion. There's nobody up there. She can have a room up there. And so she moves into the place and starts taking care of him. And an unusual relationship develops. Because when it comes right down to it, both of these people who think that they don't deserve to be loved.
Money doesn't solve that problem.
And he was married once to somebody who only married him because he had money, and that broke his heart. And she made stupid mistakes that ended her up in a trailer park turning tricks. And she feels that having made the choices that she's made, that she doesn't deserve to be loved. And it's about what happens between the two people, and there's not an ounce of sentiment in the play. It's a play that kind of wrote itself. These characters, every now and then you're lucky and the characters take over. So it's called A Change of Position.
Does
for
it have a
obvious-
happy ending?
I'm not going to
I'm
tell you
sorry,
that.
but I like romance novels. What can I tell you?
Yeah, well, this isn't a romance novel, but
I need that happy ending.
let's say that it has a hopeful ending.
Okay.
A hopeful. You see that there's a possibility of something further happening. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, I just keep doing stuff. I'm, working on what I hope will be a new book, trying to get some of my older plays done.
What's that one on?
I'm fascinated by the writers who came out of live television drama in the 50s. There have been books about the individual writers, but there's been no book about that movement. And
You need to meet Foster Hirsch.
I wouldn't mind meeting Foster Hirsch, but every now and then, I wrote a book about Second City. I wrote a book about the founding of the O'Neill Theater Center.
Oh, which I love. I love that place.
And I did a book of interviews with, I can't remember, 16 or 17 playwrights.
But you used to be the co-editor of The Best Plays.
The Best Plays.
That's how I
annual.
originally knew you.
Yeah.
Because
That was odd. I was going to NYU. I was studying film. You're looking at somebody who got a B from Martin Scorsese. He was one of my professors.
he gave you a beat.
A B. And then I wanted to see Theater Free, and the NYU had a school newspaper, and they didn't have a theater critic. So I said, I want to be the theater critic, and they said, okay. And so I started writing the reviews. I was invited into Clive Barnes's class. He was the theater critic for the New York Times, and he was running a class at NYU. And he and I hit it off. He liked my work. And he introduced me to Otis Guernsey, who was was the editor of the Best Plays Annual. And theater was beginning to change around that time, and Otis was getting grumpy. It was the beginning of Off Broadway. And he said, Jeff, do you like this stuff? I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, well, he said they're using language I wouldn't allow in my living room. They're taking their clothes off and they're cutting the intermissions. They're cutting the intermissions. And I said, well, I can sort of understand your problems with the bad language and the taking the clothes off. What's your problem with them cutting the intermissions? He says, one fewer chance to drink. He was this old school New York Herald Tribune theater critic back in the days when the New York Herald. So he says, theater's changed from what I'm interested in. And he says, but I'm still running the book, but I don't want to have to see all this crap. You want to see it? I said, you mean see everything for free? He says, well, that's not the primary reason, but I guess, yeah, okay. So I became the co-editor of the Best Plays Annual, and for 11 years I went to 150 plays a year, and I chose the 10 best plays of the year. I ran into one small problem. Wow. It was one year I had a play opening off Broadway. It was called American Enterprise, and Otis went to see it, and he says, well, this has got to go into the book. And I said, Otis, you can't put it into the book. I'm co-editor. It will look like the fix is in. I can't displace somebody else. He says, well, I'm the damn editor, and he says, so this year there'll be 11 plays in the book.
Oh, I love it. I have to cut this short. I could listen to you for hours. I find you so fascinating.
Well, it's a lot of fun. I'm tromping down memory lane back when I had more hair.
Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like my audiences to know?
Well, from a practical point of view, I hope people will want to read Something Wonderful right away, because I think that they'll have a good time. It's very funny, and it'll help people understand why American comedy is where it is, because it came out of these people doing these remarkable things in the back room of a bar.
I love it. I am so grateful for my guest, Jeffrey Sweet. I'd like to thank Magda Katz and the Hotel Edison. Magda for always making us look and sound good, and the Hotel Edison for giving us a place to live. I'm Susanna Bowling, and this is Live from the Hotel Edison. Times Square Chronicles presents.